What's up, everybody? Welcome to the PayTrace Power30. My name is Sam. I'm one of the sales trainers here at PayTrace. Joining us today, Mr. Patrick Seymour. What's going on, Patrick?
Thank you for inviting me, Sam.
Thanks for joining us today. For those of you that are new to PayTrace Power30, I want to give you a very warm welcome. These are quick 30-minute sessions where you get a little bit of insight into what's going on in PayTrace and get to learn some of the faces behind what we're doing. I want to say a little preface on this. We're going to be talking a lot about some marketing stuff today. If you have some questions, we tend to run out of time on questions. So get those in early and often. If you wiggle your mouse around on the screen, you'll see a Q&A box pop up. Shoot those into us. Our marketing team's going to be here in the background answering questions, and we'll actually have some time at the end of the call today to make sure those are answered. Whew. That was a mouthful.
You did it well.
We've done this before a couple times. So with that, I want to introduce Patrick. Patrick is our marketing manager. So he's making sure everything's looking good. Also, very importantly, he's getting a lot of market data in the background. So we're going to be talking a lot about that with a little flavor on retention today. So we've got some cool stuff we're going to talk about. But I want to get to learn a little bit more about you, Patrick. We've had the opportunity to travel a little bit.
We have,
which has been pretty fun. Hitting up the Mohegan Sun Casino at NEAA.
Yes.
I learned on that trip that you are a pretty avid home brewer.
I have been for many years. Everyone needs a good hobby, right?
If you're going to have a hobby, I'd say that's a pretty good one to have. So, kind of traditional Pacific Northwest, we're pretty big on our brews up here, our IPAs. What would you say maybe are some of your favorite types of experiments that you've tried?
Well, I've got successful and fails for experiments.
Okay.
The more successful ones, lately I've been doing pale ales. I like pale ales.
Okay.
And making them really hoppy. You can dry hop them so they're very similar to an IPA.
Really?
And my last batch was a brown ale. It's wintertime, so
sure, that makes sense.
You'll have your beer.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little bit of a weenie when it comes to the pales. I don't like the IBUs. I don't like the bitterness. But if you can brew up a good lager, Pilsner, sign me up.
Can't quite do that. I need cold fermentation for that. I keep it in my closet. So.
Oh my goodness, that is really garage homebrewing. So what are some of these fails then that you've come across?
Trying to make beers a little less alcohol, just adding a little less sugar. It's funny. It's the exact same recipe, but a little less sugar, and it changes the whole characteristic of the beer. I can tell it age over weeks, over months. It's a different beer, and I've actually changed the style by just adding a little bit of less sugar or a handful, a bit more oatmeal for mouthfeel. Changes the whole character of the beer.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Some cool tips. Well, unfortunately, this isn't the home brewing webinar. I'd love it to maybe transition to that one day, maybe as a personal pet project. But our audience it sounds like there's a lot of interest to learn about some marketing data within PayTrace. And you guys, the marketing team's been doing some really cool stuff in the background around some voice of customer. Can you maybe tell our audience a little bit, what is voice of customer and what is that helping us measure?
This all came about because of retention. We work hard, our partners work hard to build a really profitable portfolio. How long are they going to stick around? Are there any leading indicators to know when a merchant might leave us?
Okay.
So it's really around retention.
Okay. So one of the things that we brought up on a lot of webinars, and I think it's an area that's often overlooked, is this idea of retention, right? A lot of our sales partners are really focused on the faucet. This is, maybe not the best analogy, but how can we add more into the pot? But what we're trying to do now is maybe focus on, right, how do we keep them from leaving? How do we keep them on board for longer?
Exactly. Many partners, as you said, would rather spend that dollar for net new business rather than to retain business. But you've probably all heard statistics that it costs much more to grab a brand new customer rather than keep one that you've got.
Sure.
So that's the philosophy.
So you along with our client support team has actually been doing a lot of internal research on merchants that have left PayTrace. It does happen.
Yes.
Not super often, but it does happen. What is this voice of customer? What does that look like? How are we gathering this data on retention and attrition?
Great question. We've got a Net Promoter Score platform. The platform is a really simple survey. Twice a year, we're going to send out a survey to our merchants and their associated reseller sales partners. We're asking, how likely are you to recommend PayTrace on a 0 to 10 scale? And then why? So we're getting that satisfaction score. The Rolling Stones satisfaction song is a great one in there. That's a measure for us of how likely they are to stay with us. It's that loyalty score. The why is the real secret. They're telling us 65% of the people are taking the time just to fill out 1 or 2 sentences to tell us what they like about PayTrace.
That's interesting. So with that survey that's going out, what is some of the information that we've gleaned from that? What learning have we done?
Gosh, the first thing is, this is a totally PayTrace branded survey. We're asking only how likely are to recommend PayTrace. But some of those learnings are, the merchants are telling us also what they like or dislike about our reseller sales partners.
Interesting.
So that's one key piece of information.
Okay. So it seems like there's kind of a divide, right? There's some stuff that's PayTrace related and some stuff that may be out of PayTrace's realm that may be specific to their merchant service provider or some other entity.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So that's really interesting. So this data that you're gathering, how I'm trying to figure out a way to phrase this the right way. What are we doing with this data that we're gathering, right? We're getting all this information about why merchants are either recommending us or maybe not as happy. What's the goal that we're doing with that data?
Retention. Our client service team is going through all the surveys, and we get hundreds of surveys per week. They're going through and looking at the detractors, and we're following up on those. We're following up on why a merchant may be dissatisfied. We want to know that right away. It might be a training issue. It might be just something simple that we can do on our end. We've got a brilliant 5-star customer support team that follows up on all those to make merchants happy.
Are you seeing any trends with that then? Right, are we seeing some commonalities of why merchants either really like PayTrace? Maybe let's start with that. What are some of the positives that we're learning from this?
Top 3 or top 4, ease of use. They love the platform just because it's so simple, so easy to navigate. The second most commented on reason is our client support team. They love us. The third is the reliability of the system. Merchants rely on us for authorization, for settlement, for uptime, for reporting. That's all happening.
Interesting.
So those are our top 3.
Okay, so those are some pretty good values.
Yes.
And one thing to point out on there is we talk about interchange optimization a lot on these calls, right? That's one thing that I think PayTrace does probably better than really anybody else. But those things that you mentioned, right? A lot of them have to do with actually values other than, saving money at the end of the day, right? It has to do with support. And so it's really interesting that we're finding some commonalities there.
It is. Some of those key nuggets, some of the secrets that we're finding, this is also informing our product development team. We're learning how to optimize interchange even more.
Sure.
We're learning that savings, matter of fact, savings, we can tag the data, and some of the comments that come through, savings is one of the #1 things that they rate really highly as well. So complex merchants get that. They may have a professional office in multiple places, multiple locations. They may even have an e-commerce site. As you know, PayTrace can handle all that. So complex merchants are recognizing the savings.
Interesting. That's awesome. So I want to backtrack a little bit. You had mentioned Net Promoter Score earlier as a tool, and I think until we started digging into this, that was something I had no insight on. Would you mind maybe explaining a little bit of what this concept of Net Promoter Score NPS is to our audience, and what exactly does that mean for PayTrace?
It's a satisfaction score. Anything, and it's rated on a scale of -100 to 100. A good score technically is anything over 0. A great score, an excellent score is 50.
Okay.
World class is 70 or above. Right now we're at 40.
Okay.
Just our own internal surveys.
Sure.
There's a lot of ways to game a Net Promoter Score survey. You could do it right after an onboarding event, right after a video, a training event. So different people measure that differently. So we've got our own internal scores, but I also see there are some secret shoppers out there. There's some customer sites out there that'll do a Net Promoter Score outside of us.
Sure.
They rate PayTrace 71. So
Really?
I really like that one.
That's just above the that excellent range that you mentioned.
They do. And to throw maybe some competitors under the bus, and I wrote this down, so I want to, I don't want to miss this. Square is a -8.
Really?
Square. PayPal is 13.
Okay.
We're at 71, I mentioned. Authorized.net is 58.
Okay.
So not just our data. This is an independent scoring.
That's okay. That's from that external site. James, do you have that any data on that you can share with our audience on there? Yeah, if you could pull that up really quick. So this is one of the sites, Net Promoter Score .guru. It looks like it is, but it looks like this is PayTrace's one, and you can see, right, this is some of the information. You can go through here and look up a lot of brands, right? Patrick brought up some examples of some industry related brands, but there's all sorts of ones like Apple, Microsoft, Costco is going to be on there. So you can actually get a feel for what people feel about these different brands and right, would they recommend them or not? So there's some really cool stuff on here. I know I've spent a decent amount of time on here. I know, you kind of live in this realm, but it's kind of fun to play around with and see how companies are really stacking up.
It absolutely is.
So right, we're at a 40 right now, you say, is internally. So what are we trying to do with this data to bump up that number, right? How can we get to a 50, a 70?
The most important thing we want to do is retain and help our partners retain merchants.
Right.
So we're really focused on taking that data, looking at what customers are saying, and we can compare that to our score. We can share what resellers are seeing. So we may have a 50, a reseller may have a 10, or may have an 8, may have an 80. So we're able to see that and compare that data as well.
So you had mentioned earlier some kind of industry stuff, complex merchants that are using e-commerce or APIs, things like that. Mm-hmm. Are we seeing any industry trends as far as Net Promoter Scores? Maybe some are higher that like PayTrace more than maybe some that might be detractors?
We've done some of that slicing. One of the things that merchants don't like about some of the things that we're seeing is our pricing. We don't set the pricing. Our partners set that pricing. So to be really specific in answering your question, I see dissatisfaction among nonprofit agencies, charitable agencies, retail agencies. It's priced really high for those. And that may be an okay strategy. Maybe you want more B2B, and so you price those retail a little bit higher.
Sure.
That's an okay strategy.
Okay. So pricing seems to be a concern for some. How are we doing anything to address that? So if we are getting this data that maybe one of our partners, has this response from merchant, right? Maybe pricing is too high or something that may be related to that. How are we getting that information to our partners?
Through executive briefings.
Okay.
Our account teams are going out, setting up annual meetings with our partners, sometimes more than that, sometimes semi-annual meetings. And retention is among those discussion elements.
Interesting. Could you go expand a little bit more on what this executive briefing thing is?
Oh, absolutely. Talk about performance. We really share the numbers. It's not only retention. It's a lot of the level 3, a lot of the interchange. It's value to merchants. We have a lot of data, and we're able to share with our partners, here's where your merchants are performing. Here's a good way. Now you can go back and talk to a particular merchant about how much you're saving on interchange optimization, where the satisfaction is. We've learned a couple interesting things. I don't want to name names, but Sherry, if you're out there and you're watching, some of the voice of customer feedback that we're getting, they love particular merchants. I mean, sometimes we'll get good, we'll get bad, we'll get ugly, we'll get indifferent feedback. So some of the positive things that we're sharing is, hey, this rep is doing it well. This rep is really communicating some of the benefits and value, and therefore retaining merchants.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I want to take a quick sec. We have been getting a few questions in here, so I want to make sure that we address these as we go along. But Todd has a great question on here. He's wondering, if you receive a survey back from a merchant that's not satisfied, maybe they're a detractor or they're at risk of leaving, right? How do we communicate that information out to the reseller? Are we scheduling calls with our partners? Are we kind of keeping that internally for now? What does that exactly look like besides executive briefings?
We'll always call on every detractor. We're following up with an email, with a phone call if we can reach out. They're busy merchants, so sometimes we need to schedule those.
Okay.
And yes, we do reach back out to merchants if they're hot to resellers. If they're hot for a particular reason, we want our sales partners to know that. We'll handle it. As you know, we receive a lot of calls that aren't PayTrace related.
Sure. Yeah.
So we'll share those. We share the upsell with our reseller sales partners as well.
Okay. So what does that mean? We share the upsell.
A merchant may say, "Gosh, I want to increase my customer vault."
Okay.
And we'll say, "Great." A partner may say, "Gosh, I heard you talk about an integration. How do I get there? How do I do that?" And we're going to work with our sales partners to help them make that sale.
I've dug through some of this data personally myself, and some things that I found somewhat common is merchants that are saying, "Hey, we liked PayTrace, but you don't have recurring payments, right? So we're going to switch," or "You don't have a payment link," which in fact we do, right?
Yes.
So I feel like that kind of ties in with that upsell, right? This is a good opportunity to educate merchants and go back out to our sales partners and say, "Hey, there's a little bit of a gap of where that merchant is and where they need to be, and you can help fill it."
Yes.
Right. So there's some really cool data. So we are reaching out. It sounds like we are reaching out to the merchants and to the partners. So Todd, if you haven't gotten any calls from us, you should be pretty good. So you're doing things okay, Todd. And yeah, Todd, I know you well, man. So another follow-up question that we got in here is, you mentioned pricing is kind of a big kind of commonality in some of these detractors. One of our attendees is asking, are we seeing that it's the pricing for PayTrace fees, or does that include the reseller, the merchant service fees, the partner fees?
We think it's our partner fees.
Okay.
Customers don't always say, and we don't set those, but when we have those conversations with our partners, they may come up and say, "Gosh, you know what? This is priced pretty high, especially for nonprofits."
Right. And we're not setting the price on these gateway accounts, so it really just comes down to that overall price.
Correct.
Of what they're paying in aggregate. So there's a question on here that says, "What was number 2?" I'm not exactly sure what that means, so whoever sent that in, if you could elaborate on that might be appreciated. So another conversation I wanted to get into was a little bit of sweet spot data. I've mentioned this on a couple of my webinars, right? We have types of merchants that are considered quote unquote sweet spot merchants. And that's something that you and your team has really headed up over the last, I'd say, couple of years.
Yes.
Could you tell maybe our audience what the sweet spot data is and maybe what a sweet spot merchant for PayTrace is?
Happy to. A sweet spot merchant for PayTrace is a B2B merchant. It's a complex B2B merchant. They are using a customer vault. They're doing a lot of recurring payments. They've probably got an integration. If they've got all those factors in there, they're seeing the value and retention. Their ability to stay with PayTrace and you as our partners is much greater. They're not going to attrit.
So I know that we've done a little bit of data on that, and I love having numbers. I don't know if you have this in your head. I'm going to assume you might. But we found that these sweet spot merchants that are fitting these high transaction volumes and they're using an integration and they're using the customer vault, right? They are attriting less, right? They're staying on longer.
Yes.
Do you year over year data, what does that look like for kind of a percentage wise?
That's a great question. So the industry average is 25 to 30% every year. Our portfolios, not our portfolios, our partner portfolios are change. This is from the Strawhacker Group. So 25 to 30%.
Okay.
PayTrace is about half of that. So that's really good. And that's due to our customer service. Now that we've got a Net Promoter Score platform and can see the voice of customer, we can act on that even quicker.
Right.
So the goal again is retaining profitable merchants, retaining those B2B profitable merchants.
That's awesome. So just to kind of reiterate, we kind of have double the retention in essence of industry average.
Yes.
Okay.
And we want to work with our partners just to improve that.
Sure. That's awesome. That's a really cool statistic. With the sweet spot specifically, I remember hearing a fact, and I think it might have been in a conversation or a presentation that Marcy gave, but something like for those sweet spot ones, those ones that are the B2B and they do all that other stuff, it's something like 3% or like, could you correct me on that?
Oh,
year over year?
Attrition for sweet spot merchants is 2.6%.
Okay.
2.6.
Okay.
Versus 25 versus 30%.
Right.
So that just goes to show that the more engaged those complex merchants are with your services using PayTrace, the longer they'll stay.
And we're finding that those sweet spot merchants, the ones that check all those boxes, they're processing very high volume as well, right? So for those of you that are sales agents on this call, right, check the boxes, they use the customer vault, maybe they have an integration, large ticket volume, and overall, right, they're probably going to stick around with you for a very long time if you set them up on PayTrace. Is that a pretty accurate statement?
Absolutely is.
Yeah, that's really cool. So we do have a poll. I'm always big on polls, but that voice of customer survey that we're sending out is how likely are you to recommend PayTrace? Could we launch that really quick? Awesome. So scale of 1 to 10, guys. Let's get some engagement. How likely are you to recommend PayTrace? I think, okay, this might be a little skewed because I figure you guys probably like PayTrace if you're on this call. There we go. We got a 9 on there. Lots of 10s. We'll take about maybe 10 more seconds. All right, go ahead and shut that down, James. Not surprisingly, most people said a 10 out of 10.
Ooh.
So that's pretty cool. We've got a lot of promoters.
The next question is why? Why did you give us that score? I'm curious.
Yeah, we'd like to know. You know, having the marketing team in this room, you know, why do you recommend PayTrace? What do you like about us? And maybe what can we do in the future that's going to help you out, right? That's some pretty good data that we're trying to gather.
Absolutely.
What would you recommend if you know, maybe one of our partners has suggestions or they're seeing some pain? What's the best way to let us know?
2 different ways, 3 ways actually. One, you can contact our client support team. Mm-hmm. They're always available. They've got a lot of specific data on your merchants. The second is to talk to your account representative, talk to your account exec.
Okay.
Particularly in the third side, when we do those executive briefings. And if your organization has a retention team and really want to pay attention to retention and ask a bit more detailed questions, let us know. We're happy to engage in those conversations.
That's awesome. Well, guys, we've got a couple questions in here. We only have time for maybe one more. An anonymous attendee is asking, does anybody else actually do NPS surveys that you're aware of? Maybe any of our competitors or indirect competitors?
Authorize.net does. PayPal.
They are. Okay.
Square, Stripe, they all do.
That's awesome. Well, that's some cool data to look at, guys. We're going to wrap it up here, but I appreciate your time. Definitely, if you're interested in learning more about this data, reach out to your account manager or client support. We'd like to hear that. Patrick, thank you so much, man.
Thank you, Sam.
It's been fun having you on here.
Likewise.
We'll see you out here on the next Power 30. Take care, guys.